Welcome, everybody. Okay, sorry I'm late. There was some technological issue. So everybody, welcome. I'll be very brief because I'm late and I'm sorry about that. Look, it's a big honor that we're doing this book launch for CARY Nelson. As many of you know, is a colleague of ours at ISGAP. CARY is a Jubilee Professor of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and is the author of only 36 books and hundreds of articles. He served as the national president of the American Association of University Professors and is currently the chair of the Alliance for Academic Freedom. He also serves on our academic advisory board here at ISGAP. And we've created a book series at the Academic Studies Press. It's a prestigious press that was actually just bought by De Gruyter's. They're in Oxford, in the UK, and also in Boston. And CARY's book is part of the ISGAP series on critical contemporary anti-Semitism studies. And the title of CARY's book is Hate Speech and Academic Freedom. And unfortunately, it's apropos and appropriate of our times. I wish this was a book in the history departments in some obscure university, but tragically, it's timely and important. So CARY offers important insights into what's taking place at university campuses in North America and Europe, and how there's polarization taking place over the character of the depictions of the Jewish state and Israel, and how the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is being decoded and played out at universities. The book reveals the damage that anti-Semitism does to identify Jewish students, staff, and faculty in an increasingly hostile manner. The book asks the question about the impact this has had on the fundamental principles of academia and academic freedom, notions of freedom of speech, standards in hiring and firing of faculty members and administrators, and the ethics of academic conduct and debate. And we're doing this while the president of Columbia University has been subpoenaed to Congress to testify on anti-Semitism at universities, and there's increasing court cases and oversight of academic conduct in universities and the explosion of anti-Semitism. So CARY, I'm sorry I'm late. The floor is yours, and thank you so much for being a part of ISGAP and part of our book series. It's really an honor for all of us that you have done this book with us. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charles and Daphne. And, I'm very glad to be part of this series. Charles got me a great copy editor. It's one of the things he did, which was certainly immensely appreciated. So this is a book that's concentrated on what I would characterize as the relatively autonomous space of the North American and European campus. And I have detailed examples, not just from the US, but from Canada and Britain, and some shorter examples from the rest of Europe, because there really are different regulations and context in all those different countries. So I call it a relatively autonomous space because the university is a permeable space. The outside world intrudes with varying degrees of respect for that autonomy. One might say that in Florida, the respect is kind of gone, but there it is. And on the campus itself, there are micro-autonomous spaces, especially academic departments, that sustain microclimates for teaching and research, climates that can be relatively free or coercive themselves, in distinction from what the status of the campus as a whole may be. Now, as a former AAUP president, I can say with conviction that faculty themselves often misunderstand and misrepresent their personal and collective autonomy. They can as well misrepresent the boundaries between campus, legislature, and the public sphere. That said, there are substantial anti-Semitic assaults on the principles that govern the academy, both from within and without the campus. Problems arrive from both vectors. So I want to talk today about several of those threats, both as I discuss them in the book and as I see them in the wake of the shattering assault on Jewish safety and identity worldwide that took place on October 7. Both in Hate Speech and Academic Freedom and in my 2019 book, Israel Denial, I spend a lot of time tracking instances when academic anti-Zionism crosses a line into, or in fact becomes, anti-Semitism. A number of us have argued that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism's contemporary mask, its public face. But those distinctions now seem no longer to the point. When thousands of Hamas terrorists crossed the border into the Jewish state in a frenzied campaign to kill Jews, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism have effectively fused. It's as if we need a new term that combines the two impulses, or at least that we need to recognize that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are now interchangeable. Incredibly enough, some anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist faculty members no longer choose to insist on the distinction, but rather they tell us true anti-Zionism requires homicidal anti-Semitism. That was the essence of Lara Sheeha's post-10/7 declaration from her new home in Qatar. Judith Butler, on the other hand, tells us rape and murder are really just resistance, a rational political necessity. I wrote at length about both of these faculty members prior to 10/7, but they've revealed a lot more about their character, their personal and political character, quickly thereafter. The massacres of 10/7 insert a caesura, an indecipherable gap in understanding between the Jewish worlds before and after that day. But we can extrapolate from some earlier events to hazard a guess about what campus anti-Semitism will mean hereafter. In the book, I point out that each of Israel's wars with Hamas has been met with a significant escalation of campus anti-Zionist rhetoric, and sometimes with new and more aggressive actions as well. There have been 4 previous major hostilities between Israel and Hamas, 2008 to 9, 2012, 2014, and 2021. The year after the 2012 war, we saw our first academic disciplines declare war on Israeli universities, with American Studies and other associations for the first time endorsing the movement to boycott Israelis. Those actions gained credibility for the campus-based boycott movement. The year after 2014 saw additional disciplines, including women's studies, join the trend, while others continued pitched rhetorical battles amongst competing constituencies. The 2021 war saw campus anti-Zionists gather their forces more rapidly as academic departments, in a very significant move, for the first time adopted anti-Zionism as their official policy. After the 2021 war, it became increasingly common for Zionists to be denied membership in progressive student groups. In 2023 and 2024, to reiterate, we saw anti-Semitism drop the mask of anti-Zionism, with Jew hatred and Israel hatred becoming clearly interchangeable, perhaps for the first time. Mass demonstrations against Israel for the first time populated campuses and communities alike, and physical violence was added to the threats Jewish students had to confront. The new floor for campus anti-Semitism, there's a new floor every time there's a war with Hamas, I'm afraid is not simply increased hostility to Israel. I think it's something much closer to deep-seated anti-Semitic hatred. How it plays out over the next of 2024 depends in part on events in Gaza and the responses both on and off campus. There's at least some evidence that a few campus administrators realized that hooliganism is not a viable form of student political activism. But we are a long way from dealing with the fact that intimidation and indoctrination are not gold standards for campus practice either. The book I'm introducing today urges us to confront indoctrination and intimidation and take action against them. When I was completing the book late last summer, I had real doubts that many faculty members would entertain the solutions I was proposing. But matters have become markedly worse. So it's possible that there will be an audience for the targeted academic practices that I discuss. But first, let me list the reasons I'm worried that the present level of anti-Zionist anti-Semitism will not abate, at least anytime soon. We begin with the recognition that the hate that flooded across American campuses in literally hours of the Hamas assault would not have been possible had it not been waiting in reserve. Without that assumption, it's difficult to explain the counterintuitive phenomenon of an unprecedented assault on Israelis prompting a surge of anti-Semitism, something that seems illogical. Hatred for victims of merciless, inhumane violence is not to be expected. For the campus left, that reaction may have been facilitated by outrage that Israelis, the left's official oppressor group, were suddenly positioned as victims. Pure hatred helps deny that transformation. The October pogrom was a personal affront for some on the left. It falsified Israelis, turning them to something anti-Zionists certainly know that they are not, victims. Just as we imagine Hamas to be militarily capable of organizing and carrying out the October assault, or of harboring sufficient hatred to fuel face-to-face butchery and rape, we didn't understand the depth of latent anti-Israel passion in our own students and colleagues. Now that it's found expression, it's not likely to soon pass. That means students, faculty, and staff whose affinity for Israel partly shapes their identities are going to face increased pressure to disavow the relationship, effectively breaking with themselves. Most undergraduate students are at a vulnerable age where they're in the process of identity formation and consolidation. Zionist students in anti-Semitic campus settings will suffer assaults on their emerging identities. Indeed, with identity politics now dominating many campus disputes, we need to realize that assaulting Jewish student identities during their vulnerable, impressionable years is a primary goal for Israel's opponents. It often replaces political disagreements over Israeli policy. Virulent attacks on Israel now serve simultaneously as attacks on the Jews in the room. I can list 13 reasons, you may have more, why the hostile campus environment is likely to persevere. Quickly, 1, because the arguments against the war in Gaza has substantially advanced the delegitimation of Israel for some students and faculty. By definition, categorical delegitimization is not a passing condition. 2, because international media have mounted a more severe critique of Israel's conduct of the war than we've had before, and reached an unprecedented consensus that it is a humanitarian disaster. 3, because the connections some Jews feel with Israel have been frayed or disavowed. 4, because disciplinary and departmental anti-Zionism will empower increasingly anti-Zionist teaching and faculty publication. 5, because administrators seeing a polarized campus will not risk the controversy entailed by a full press effort to defeat anti-Semitism. 6, because we confront more aggressive student protests than we've seen before. 7, because we have a new faculty organization, National Faculty for Justice in Palestine, devoted to anti-Semitic anti-Zionism. 8, because faculty fear of speaking out against anti-Semitism has itself escalated in tandem with recognition that speaking out is more necessary than ever after. 9, because an unprecedented ad hoc wave of individually initiated boycotts of Israeli faculty is underway. 10, because Zionism has lost the war of public opinion. 11, because the Netanyahu government stands in the way of the defense of Israel in the diaspora. 12, because the mounting photographic record of death and destruction and warnings of starvations in Gaza has overwhelmed Israel's valid reasons for fighting and its undermined faith in the IDF's standard. 13, finally, we can't dismiss the troubling possibility that the preceding forces have re-energized the historical hatred of the Jews that has simmered beneath the illusion of our more enlightened contemporaneity for decades. So what can we do? First of all, in addition to more aggressive group actions, we are certain to see more of what the Hate Speech and Academic Freedom book calls micro boycotts, actions against Zionists in the West and in Israel initiated and carried out by individuals. Such micro boycotts, often discriminatory and in violation of professional standards, have occasionally been initiated at least since 2001 or 2. But the sense of moral and professional warrant for individual hostility is much greater now in the wake of the increased number of anti-Zionist disciplinary and departmental position statements. Among the most destructive are false, manufactured accusations of misconduct levied at individual students or faculty. After months of investigation and group harassment, people are often exonerated, but the original perpetrators go unpunished. That pattern of indifference and forgiveness must change. Students who lie and cause serious reputational damage to others must be expelled. Just as education can't thrive if there are no consequences for group violations of classes and cancellations of speakers or civil disobedience inside buildings, standards for individual behavior can neither be taught nor maintained if there are no consequences for misconduct. I give sufficient examples to help people recognize such individual actions and respond to them. The last 2 chapters are devoted to the single most effective preventative educational action a college can take: adoption of the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Zionism, abbreviated as IHRA. Over the last few years, the campaign against IHRA has mounted additional arguments against it. I detail each of those and explain why they typically misrepresent what IHRA says and recommends. To be clear, when people refer to the IHRA definition, they refer to the entire text, including the 11 examples that are the heart of the matter, including those that address the central contemporary problem of anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. IHRA's examples give some conceptual coherence to what can be a chaotic flood of anti-Semitic statements, especially on the web. The examples provide a usable framework that can shift debates from accusation to analysis. The IHRA insistence on contextualization of potentially anti-Semitic statements sets up a potential analytic process. Without this educational guidance, students confused about what anti-Semitism represents in practice instead turn perhaps to self-examination. Am I anti-Semitic? Rarely a helpful strategy. Extending the question to others, are they anti-Semitic, often makes it still more unresolvable. Do I or others say things the IHRA examples suggest that people will experience as anti-Semitic is a workable alternative? Even the most intensely debated of the 11 examples are greatly clarifying if they are used honorably. Anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic opponents have been hard at work to misrepresent what a number of the 11 examples say. So some courage is necessary to insist on reading the examples accurately. An entire anti-Zionist industry has evolved to claim that one IHRA example of anti-Semitism, quote, applying double standards, by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation is intended to treat all criticism of Israeli policies as anti-Semitic, even though thousands of Israelis themselves criticize their government policies every day. Some IHRA opponents insist as well that this principle means you can't criticize anything Israel does unless you personally compare it to government practices worldwide. Now, that's silly. IHRA gives us a reasonable comparative procedure to use in evaluating criticism of Israeli policies and actions. There's no expectation that any given individual will do a worldwide comparison. It's a collective responsibility. In bringing the history of IHRA up to date, the book also describes key examples of the many recent important research projects using the 11 examples to classify anti-Semitic statements in social media. And they make clear how critical IHRA is proving in understanding social practices. From 2016 to 17, after IHRA was first introduced, there were several examples of misuse by overzealous administrators. They were widely criticized, and it's become clear they should not be applied again in that way, and they haven't been. IHRA critics cite the 2016 to 2017 instances of examples of what we are definitely going to continue facing, and I think they are inaccurate because of that. They've proved good warnings. The most prominent IHRA critic, Bard College's Kenneth Stern, can't seem to distinguish between a college and a delicatessen. So he conflates university practices and what external NGOs demand and treats them as equal evidence of IHRA's risks to the campus. Stern also represents himself as the sole drafter of the definition, though the testimony of others involved suggests otherwise, that other people actually suggested a number of the statements that are included in the 11 examples and the preface to them. So I actually offer in the book a model policy statement that universities should adopt to try to remove people's anxieties about what IHRA will and will not do. So the policy statement that I offer is this, and it's what a university might say and adopt in addition to the IHRA statement itself. The university formally adopts the IHRA Working Definition of Antisemitism as its official guide to identifying, analyzing, and combating examples of anti-Semitic speech and action. In doing so, we endorse the definition's important qualification that full understanding of potentially anti-Semitic statements requires an account of the context in which they were made. That will often require knowledge of the long history of what has been called the longest hatred, its strategies, metaphors, consequences, and contemporary manifestations. We also join with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance in specifying that the definition is a non-legally binding document. Thus, it will not be used on campus as a quasi-legal invitation to disciplinary proceedings against students, staff, or faculty, nor will it be used to justify canceling events arranged by student or faculty groups. However, we believe its 11 examples provide an extremely helpful guide to the main 11 forms of contemporary anti-Semitism, and thus offer substantial assistance in understanding their growing presence both here and abroad. The goal of the working definition is not to shut down conversations, but rather to illuminate them with understanding. The definition cannot be used to prevent anti-Semitic speech from occurring, but it can be used to help reach consensus about which statements merit condemnation. That will help alert us to broader patterns of anti-Semitic speech that require a coordinated response. That's the end of the policy statement. Now, I offer it in the hope that those who are undecided can be persuaded that the fears Stern and his allies are stimulating can in fact be nullified, and we can get on to using the IHRA definition to help educating campuses. But the IHRA definition itself is not going to be enough to counter the damage caused by radically anti-Zionist faculty. So here we get into the tough stuff. That will require our recommitting to the founding principle that academic freedom was established to protect the search for the truth. And that will mean that scholarship and teaching devoted to falsehoods must be called out and condemned. I argue in the book that radical anti-Zionism has begun to claim that any critique of its aims, methods, and conclusions is a denial of free speech rights and academic freedom. But academic freedom entails a commitment to correct error and call out deception for what it is. That's what academic freedom was supposed to be about. The guiding principle is this: academic freedom protects the right to say what you want, but it does not protect you from professional evaluations and consequences. I'm deeply committed to the principle that tenure protects people from being fired for holding malicious beliefs and expressing them in writing, public speaking, or teaching. But there are decision points in faculty careers where colleagues are expected to exercise decisive professional judgments about people's work. The decision points where those judgments are most consequential are at hiring, tenure, and promotion. People whose work promotes hatred can be turned down by hiring or tenure and promotion committees. You don't have to hire a racist or an anti-Semite. Academic freedom means that a faculty member can insist that Blacks are racially inferior, that Jews are engaged in international conspiracy to dominate the world. But we do not have to reward such views when mandated reviews are underway. We are expected then to judge whether a person's scholarship advances the state of knowledge in a given field, whether it does a responsible job of marshaling evidence to support its claims, whether its arguments are coherent, whether it engages substantially with opposing positions, whether it offers new insights to the scholarly community. Anti-Zionist work can pass such tests, but polemic void of these qualities should not. Unfortunately, the world we are in puts severe challenges to these principles. The most damaging one that hate speech and academic freedom confronts is the wholesale political degradation of entire academic disciplines. What are we to do when a faculty member being evaluated echoes anti-Semitic beliefs that his or her academic discipline has come to regard as true? I cite testimony of the AAUP's decades-long belief that disciplinary consensus is the gold standard for judging the acceptability of the arguments faculty deploy in teaching and research. Thus, a European historian who claims the Holocaust didn't happen could literally be judged unfit to teach. But what are we to do, say, with a gender studies faculty member who writes about the Middle East and insists that Israel has pursued a genocidal policy against Palestinians, that the IDF routinely rapes Palestinian women, that Zionism is a thoroughly racist ideology and has been so since its origin, all beliefs common in the field? The departmental level review will likely applaud the person's courageous teaching and research if they make these assertions. That means upper level review committees need to step in and apply the standards I just enumerated. It also means the local program may need to have its independent authority to hire new faculty removed. The principles I've outlined are also put in jeopardy by a more recent AAUP policy. Since 2015, the AAUP has held that all faculty statements on social media should be classified as extramural and be protected from professional evaluation. That means a faculty member could persistently disseminate hate speech on social media and never face any professional consequences. Indeed, faculty members could promote violence on Facebook and Twitter X and be held harmless by their institution. The AUP has never confronted the inherently international outreach social media now exercise. It has never looked, for example, at social media's role in literally facilitating mass murder in Myanmar or Sri Lanka. Examples that demonstrate why evaluation of incitement on social media cannot be limited to a North American or European context or to the Supreme Court's understanding of imminent violence. I argue in the book that persistent social media activity should be part of a person's profile in hiring and tenure decisions. By the AUP's irresponsible criteria, a person could establish an alternative, violent and hate-filled persona on social media and be protected from institutional scrutiny. Thus, a historian could get away with being a Holocaust denier so long as he or she confine the Holocaust denial to Facebook. Even after tenure, there are points when faculty members who indulge in racist or anti-Semitic speech could face consequences short of termination. They would include things like denial of promotion, to prohibition from teaching required courses, which happened to Amy Wax at the University of Pennsylvania, to denial of support for racist or anti-Semitic research projects like sabbaticals. All this requires serious multidisciplinary participation in evaluation procedures. These suggestions represent substantial challenges to current practices. I hope hate speech and academic freedom stimulates serious discussion about them. The urgency of doing so has been increased by the radically politicized and hate-inflected atmosphere we've confronted since Hamas's thoroughly planned and mercilessly executed pogrom. Thank you.
Thank you, Cary. Thank you. So now we have roughly 20 odd minutes to open it up for Q&A. And I'd like to bring some of our colleagues in. I have 1,000 questions, but I get to speak to Cary regularly. So I see, if you could raise your hands, that'd be great. I see Greg Mashberg, you have your hand up. If you could please turn on your camera, if it's possible, that'd be great. Cool. California blue sky. Greg,
okay.
Yours, and then Andrea.
That's it. Good morning and good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Cary, it goes without saying how much we value what you've done yet again. Let me just get to my question. You talked about decision making and hiring and promotion based upon what I would call outrageous conduct and statements by faculty and potential faculty members, and the justification for making employment decisions, despite the principles of academic freedom. My question is, what about the classroom? What about when a professor, some of whom may even be on this call, make outrageous statements and take outrageous positions that are counterfactual, that are demonstrably baseless as part of their teaching inside the classroom? Do you think the points that you've made about making employment decisions and promotion decisions also apply when it comes to the extreme positions that some professors, and probably more than some, take inside the classroom? Thanks.
Well, yeah, I mean, good question.
Cary,
And
Cary, I'm gonna interrupt for a second. I want to add a little bit to Greg's important question. I would even go further than Greg. I think we're reaching a point now where the zeitgeist, a significant philosophical context in which we're operating in the classroom, would argue, using philosophy, ethics, social theory, post-colonial studies, that Israel is an occupying entity and it has to be resisted by all means, and that violence, including the pogrom, is justified. And this is what is being taught in Middle East studies, in the humanities, and the social sciences. So this is not only the extreme professors that Greg is referring to. I think that this, I would argue, is a very central philosophical moment and political moment in the classroom. And this is completely accepted. And I think even to resist this ideological and philosophical perspective would sort of label us as being outside of the tent. So I think we're in this moment where this is just acceptable discourse. So
well, it absolutely is acceptable discourse in many disciplines, and it's tolerated by colleagues in other disciplines who basically just discount certain departments on their campus. They have nothing but contempt. I mean, in STEM fields, it's really very common to have absolute contempt for many humanities disciplines, and they just consider themselves, those disciplines, to be lost to civilization. And I think that's a kind of position that the university just can't survive by sustaining. To respond more directly to Greg, I think people who engage in that kind of indoctrination in their teaching, that can be absolutely dispositive during a tenure or promotion decision. And it can also be very significant in hiring, although you get these cases, mainly because I know at the university of, sorry about the family member who disagrees with you, who you hear in the background. Just a second. So you get cases where faculty members have taught in non-controversial areas, and then they're going to be hired at a new institution, and they're going to shift to controversial areas where they have strong ideological positions, and you have no evidence of their teaching being problematic. So it's sometimes hard to incorporate that kind of judgment in a hiring decision, but it's certainly available in a tenure and promotion decision. There it absolutely should be dispositive. But there are other things you can do. I mean, I was on stage, Amy Wax and I were both on stage some years ago, shortly after she was denied the right to teach required courses, after she announced in public that her Black students were universally inferior to her white students and never met the same grade. She was teaching a required course for new law students at the U of P, and what the dean did was say she couldn't teach that course anymore. She could teach elective courses that people would choose to take or not take, but she couldn't teach a required course where Black students should sit in the room. And of course, I said that I thought the dean had made the right decision. And I used the same argument in the case of Laura Sheeho at George Washington University, who was teaching a required course for psychology students who would have to be graded by her, despite her having made any number of, markedly anti-Semitic public statements on Twitter. I said she simply shouldn't be able to teach required courses. Now, of course, she may have achieved the right to teach required courses again, because she's doing so in the lovely nation of Qatar, where they may have somewhat different standards for the truth. So I think, there needs to be a broad, general conversation about pedagogy, and there also need to be some very targeted decisions to constrain what people have the right to teach or don't teach. You don't get to make your own choices. You get to be assigned courses. You can ask for your choices, but they can tell you whether you're going to teach composition, whether you want to or not. Sorry if any offense to composition teachers.
Thanks, Cary. The only thing I would disagree, I don't know if they have other perspectives in Qatar, because Qatar is a tiny country of 350,000 people, and they're giving more money to the United States university system than any other country on the planet, including some of the universities we just
I think I may have heard some rumors about that.
Yeah. So we have Andrea and then Holly.
Thank you. First of all, just to let people know, and maybe Charles, you already know. So I'm with Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, a very, very small but old and strong little charity in Canada. And we are partnering with several university faculty in Canada and Israel to conduct a study on the impact of anti-Semitism on faculty. Everybody's always talking about students, but we're very interested in knowing about what's happening on the faculty. So CARY Nelson, I'm sure this will be, we'll want to draw attention to your work. My question is really about, really consistent with what Charles said about the ideology. If you don't line up with it, you can be booted out. But does your work speak about specifically about critical race theory and DEI? We have just formed an organization of parents and educators to really focus on the need to eliminate DEI, which starts now in kindergarten all the way through university and is wreaking havoc on all of our academic programs. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, I don't talk about DEI in the book, though I am actually writing about it now, in part because my own university is deciding whether it has tentatively a requirement that when you come up for tenure, you have to prove your commitment to DEI, and you have to have evidence of committing to DEI, which I consider to be a radical violation of academic freedom. I did a huge amount of DEI-related work in the course of my years here, including a lot of research on women and minority poets, poets of Black poets, Chicano poets. I mean, I was doing a tremendous amount of that. I did what you could call affirmative action hiring, but I did it by choice. I didn't do it because I was told I had to. And I think that, the DEI enterprise has become hugely destructive by making it mandated, and also by the simple fact that there are a significant number of DEI officers and employees who are anti-Semites. I mean,
think the whole enterprise has become rotten, and it seems to be based entirely on CRT. We now have in Canada a debate going on as to whether students will be allowed into medical school unless they sign a commitment to DEI, never mind any academic achievement. It'll only be on what they say, and the law faculties as well. So it's crossed into every discipline and profession. We even brought a complaint against an engineering student.
Of course, when I wrote about Lara Shiha, I was off writing a lot about DEI, and I've continued to do that. I have a jointly authored piece about it with a psychologist that was published earlier this year. So yeah, it's become very coercive. And look, there's a simple principle. You can't ask an anti-Semite in a DEI office to incorporate Jews into minority communities. I mean, that's the insane paradox that we're confronted with. I just don't think DEI offices should have the responsibility of dealing with anti-Semitism. That was the early response, get them to include it. But I just don't believe that the fox can guard the hen house very effectively. I think anti-Semitism needs to be dealt with by separate offices on campuses, staffed by people who are really well-informed and committed to the goal.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, CARY. The next question is Holly, then Richard.
Hi, CARY. It's good to
Hi.
see you. I have to give just a tiny bit of background for my question. So I can't give too much detail, but I'm in the middle, for ongoing legal reasons, I am in the middle of facing really terrible anti-Semitism at my home institution, and it is ongoing.
And which is the institution?
It's Fisk University, the institution where we had attempted to organize a Black and Jewish unity program with Dr. Small in February. And so I can't give too many details personally because there's ongoing things happening.
I can interrupt and say that I was called a baby killer at Fisk University. I achieved infamy.
Also,
and I really don't think that's true.
I'm a sleeper agent of the state of Israel and a member of the Mossad. So as I told the student who told me that, I'm not getting paid by Mossad. I would like to get paid on the salary. In any case, it's ongoing. It's really, really terrible personally. I've been at this institution 14 years and tenured for quite a long time. I go up for full in the fall, or that's the plan. Also, I am a longstanding member of MLA, and I was watching very carefully what was going on with the statement, as well as at the last meeting, as well as your counter statement. After MLA passed the statement that they passed, I immediately canceled my membership. And now I'm the only member of my English department who's not a member of the Modern Language Association. And I'm also getting some pushback from that. So my question to you with all of this information is I'm very deeply concerned about my colleagues who are either they're tentative kind of colleagues, like they're lecturers, or they're on the tenure track who are Jewish or who are fighting on the side of fighting anti-Semitism, who are terrified to make a statement in any way. How do we encourage our junior colleagues to do what they feel to be the right thing while also helping them maintain their place? I don't want them to get fired, right? But how do I guide them? I don't know how to guide them when I personally don't know how to guide myself. I told Charles when this first started, never in my life did I think I would be the representative Jew for the entire tribe at an institution. So I feel out of water dealing with it to my person. How do I advise my junior colleagues what to do? I don't want them to lose their job. Thank you.
Sure. Well, it's a really important question, and I I have to give that advice all the time, not just on this campuses, not just at Illinois, but around the country, because I have the history of being in the AAUP. So I begin by saying, do what I say, not what I do. I was an assistant professor, perhaps in an earlier century, and I said and did as I pleased, taking really foolish risks all the time. And in retrospect, I must have been insane, but I did it. But what I tell people now is, don't roil the waters on campus. Get involved in national organizations that stand where you stand on issues of Israel and academic freedom. Take an active role, help to shape policy, but don't be public. In other words, be relatively private until you get tenure. I mean, I hate giving that advice, but I just don't think there's any choice. However, I also add something, which is if you don't find outlets at the national level for your activism, you're not going to acquire the capacity to do so after tenure. I mean, I actually have seen some people become courageous after tenure, but I can count them all on two fingers. Basically, after 7 years of enforced cowardice, perhaps preceded by 5 or more years in graduate school with the same kind of reticence, it's very difficult for people to acquire the real capacity to speak out. So you have to find an outlet, not only for your own personal dignity and sanity during the tenure years, but also so that your character doesn't become permanently corrupted by cowardice. I mean, so that's my advice. Find other venues, and I've seen some people follow that advice very successfully. Get active in organizations, but not take leadership positions, but on committees and other places where they can be visible, and then be willing to take on the local environment after tenure.
Thank you, Cary. You know, I one of the professors on the call now is Professor Jasper Pura from Rutgers University. And, you know, ISGAP is about academic freedom. And I know, Jasper, if I can call you that, you've been critical of some issues, but if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, we believe in academic freedom, and, you know, you're welcome to participate if you'd like. Okay. I guess not. But academic freedom is a wonderful thing.
Interesting participant on the call.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with Jasper's work.
Well, we invite you to ask the question if you'd like. Academic freedom is a beautiful thing. Liberal democratic values is a beautiful thing, and ending all sorts of discrimination is, the work of the scholar, of the intellectual. All right, Professor Landis, on that note. I think you're muted.
All right, I'm unmuted. So
Hi.
I have a question. Hey, CARY, as usual, lucid, on point. Pleasure to listen to you. I have a question that's not exactly what you're talking about, but
I wish we could be on your rooftop deck again soon.
Yes, that would be lovely. And the spring has come, so now we're going to start up again.
Richard has the best place on the planet to have a discussion, which is a rooftop in Jerusalem overlooking the city, open air, right thing.
So my question is, have you been following this stuff at USC about the canceling of the valedictorian speech?
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay, so I started reading it and it didn't, I think the Free Press put it well by saying that, either they say, look, you're not a valedictorian, the kind of stuff you say is really not acceptable, or you say she's a valedictorian, you let her speak, but you don't say, okay, you can be a valedictorian, but we're not going to let you speak. But in any case, so I want your opinion on that. And also, even though it's not directly related to this question of faculty, the same excuse that USC used to tell her she couldn't give her speech, which was sort of, disruption and danger, was used in Belgium to shut down Yoram Hazony's conference. And so I wonder if you could remark on this invoking this as a reason not to let people speak.
So, the first thing to say, because I've said it repeatedly when controversies like this come up, is commencement speeches are supposed to be ideologically consensual events rather than controversial political interventions. They're supposed to be occasions when people are drawn together into a community, obviously to celebrate graduating students. So you have to have that in mind when you select commencement speakers. You have to feel that the audience will be broadly supportive of what they're saying. There are plenty of other occasions on campus where you can bring in speakers designed to rile people up, but that's not what commencement is about. So we begin with a stupid decision, okay? Having made the stupid decision, I think they are stuck with letting the speech continue. Now, I don't know for certain. I've had contacts with that campus over the years, but I don't know for certain what groups were planning to protest. I would have let the speech continue, but I would have met with the groups that were planning to protest and tried to work out a deal with them whereby they would protest with signs and banners, but silently. No disruption. In other words, to provide a contrast with the anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist groups that have tried to interrupt and derail events, I would like to see a protest that was dignified. It could include handing out literature against the speaker, handing out literature that detailed her previous comments on social media, but let the event go forward because there's too much of a price to pay for canceling it. And if you can work out agreements with people and convince the groups that doing this will make them look good and make their opponents look bad, maybe you could still get away with the event taking place. But I don't approve of inviting a speaker and then canceling the speaker. But in this case, it shouldn't have happened at all.
Cool. All right, so Carrie, on that note, we're out of time and we actually need the channel, the Zoom channel. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much for your contributions to the subject matter and to the book series and continued strength.
Thank you all for coming.
Important work.
Sorry that I couldn't answer more questions. My standard is to allow any discussion to go on for 3 or 4 hours, but I realized I couldn't insist on that here.
So we'll have more conversations, I hope, with you and seminars and lectures. So thank you, Carrie, and thank you everybody
Bye-bye.
for being here, and stay well and safe. Take care.